the Moonlight Motel by a cool couch. This encounter takes place several years ago in a remote part of the Australian outback. For a little background, I'm a pretty built 6'2" dude and I was around 26 years old at the time. I was on a road trip with a mate, travelling around the central Queensland's outback in my old semi-reliable Nissan X-Trail. We're both science/zoology nerds and we had heard about this amazing dinosaur trail out this way. It was basically a grouping of 3 areas, Wittenoon, Richmond and Hudgerton, and they had previously found dino bone discoveries. There were still some fossils laying around there, as well as some seriously awesome track that had preserved footprints. Where we were staying, we were pretty hyped up for checking out this trail, so we made the decision to do the 6-hour round trip in a day. I mean, that was pretty ambitious and stupid back then. We left at 9 AM in the morning. We packed our car with lunch, as well as several litres of water and my trusty GPS, and we set off. It was a long drive, and halfway through my aircon decided to crank out. If you have ever lived in or have visited Australia in the summer, you know it's brutally hot, so I'm sure you can imagine the 3-hour trip without aircon was hell. To make things better, my GPS also stopped working, as well as the map software. Luckily, I had an old Referdex in my back seat, but it was pretty tough to revert to map reading when you're still used to using a computer screen telling you exactly where to go, especially when we're talking about the outback here, complete with dirt tracks everywhere, as well as very limited signal. So I digress. Finally we made it to the trail. We kick around for a couple of hours. I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty awesome. We then decided it was about time we head out. That was because it started getting later into the afternoon and we by God knew we didn't want to be driving back in the dark. Just as we're about to leave, this gnarly old guy, who appeared to be an employee of the trail company dressed in a khaki camouflage gear, then comes up to us and he asked us where we were from and where we were heading. He gave me the stink eye when I was vague with the details, but my mate told him the name of the town we were staying. This guy took a real liking to my mate. He then laughed when we told him about our lengthy journey. Apparently, we had taken the long route, and there was a much quicker way to get back. It would save us about an hour off of the trip. We jumped to the directions that he'd given us. We couldn't be bothered for an extra hour in the airconless oven. It was all verbal, which we wrote down. So, off we went on our merry way, thinking how lucky we were to have met this old dude who given us some sweet intel on a shortcut home. But I can't deny, there was definitely a creepy vibe coming off him. Based on the directions he gave us, we went winding along several roads in an area that I'd never been before, and eventually settled on this straight narrow dirt road. We were supposed to reach an intersection after about half an hour and take a right to continue on the road until we got to the main highway that would take us back. After about an hour and a half of driving on this dirt trail though, we still hadn't reached this magical intersection we'd been promised. I was starting to freak out a bit, thinking we'd missed the turn, but my mate was completely chilled out and we were sure that we'd get there eventually. I think that he thought I was driving too slowly, but there are kangaroos out there. Man, are those things dangerous if you hit one. We had been travelling for a little while now. It was getting later and later in the day. It got to the point where the petrol in the tank was only a quarter full. There were no houses, other roads or cars in sight, and I really was not comfortable with where we were heading. You've got to think, we're in the middle of nowhere, in a remote area in the wasteland that is the Australian outback. We don't even have any trees, only this dirt road and desolate dry bushlands and shrubs as far as the eye can see. I stopped the car and told my mate to go and get his binoculars out of the back to take a look around just in case he can see a landmark. Yes, I carried my binoculars in my car, I still do. He obliges and can make out a house-like structure that's not too far off in the distance, so we made the decision to head for that. We figured it could be to a house or maybe to people that would be nice enough to give us a direction to get some petrol or whatnot. As we neared the structure, it became apparent that it was not a house at all. We then pull up out front. We see that it's an old caravan that has been burned down to a shell from inside out. It's still got 3 blackened partial walls up though, but we can't see any way in. It actually looks like there's been somebody living there recently because there are animal bones strung up all over the place, as well as a cow skull stuck at the entrance of the caravan. Some of the animal bone things even had grass or horsehair woven into them. They look like they're arranged to be decorations. Then, we get to see this hand paint sign that had been stalked into the ground, with the words clearly saying, Moonlight Motel on it. My alarm bells are ringing loud and clear. I nudge my friend and say let's get the hell out of here, but he's distracted by something in the distance. It's a car coming in the direction that we've just come from. It's kicking up a ton of dust, which indicates that it's coming very fast towards us. It is at this point that we both hear this creepy scratching sound coming from the burned out caravan. It's like somebody is scratching at the wall from the inside. I then move a little closer to try and see what it is, and I see that there's a person peeking out at us from us in a hole in the damaged wall. Then, this childlike voice says, there is obviously a grown man imitating a little girl giggling saying, "Are you out here to play with us?" My mate and I both look at each other and book it out of there, back to the inner centrum of the X-Trail. Just as I'm about to reverse out, the other car stops just behind mine with the high beams on. I can't see the driver, but they're in my way so I can't even reverse out of there. I'm stranded. I have no choice but to drive forward and turn around that way, narrowly missing the States Motel sign. As we're about to leave, the driver starts blaring the horn, just hammering it for no reason at all. I just sped off, back in the direction that we come from, and the other car doesn't follow us. I'm now absolutely convinced that the second I turn round, I'm going to see that stupid car following us again. It's now getting to the twilight at this stage, and it's pretty dangerous to be out on these country roads since it's dark. So we're driving panicky through the darkness, but we're feeling a bit better as we manage to navigate our way back to where we've come from, the Dino Trail. We've even started to joke around with each other about what had just happened. The person in the other car was probably just honking at us to get our attention to ask for directions or something. I then pull into the parking lot and go to the front desk area of the company that runs the tours. I explained that I had gotten lost on our way back to the town we're staying at, and the lady is kind enough there to give us directions to get petrol for the ride back. I couldn't help myself though. I mentioned to her that her workmate is a real jerk for giving us those weird directions. We figured that there was no way he messed up the advice he'd given us, he was just fooling with us. And she then gave me this weird look and asked me to describe the guy. I do, and her face goes all funny and she says that man doesn't work here. I saw him talking with a tourist today. My boss actually had to ask him to leave. He kept trying to get the details of where people were staying and telling them that he had vacancies at his place and they could stay there, the Moonlight Hotel. Is it safe to be doing this? By the Scrumpster. Okay, so this happened in early spring of 2010. My wife and I are both 25. We were heading up to my folks' cabin in upstate New Hampshire for the weekend. We both had to work later than usual, so we knew that we weren't going to be arriving until around 1 AM or so. This wasn't really a problem, since we lived in Massachusetts and the drive was typically only 4 hours or so. Now the cabin itself is on a small and very secluded lake, at the very end of a private dirt road. The privacy and seclusion of the place is a large part of the appeal. There is no phone. In order to get a cell reception, you have to drive a few miles into town. There is only one house on our side of the lake, and only 6 cabins in total on the entire lake. So it's pretty much about as secluded as you're going to get in modern day New England. As a matter of fact, in order to even get to our private road, you have to drive down a mile of another dirt road. You have to then cross a causeway that crosses a narrow point in the lake, then take a fork in the road with signs plainly stated as dead ends or private roads. Even then, it's still another quarter of a mile to the cabin, so basically, this isn't a place that people typically stumble across. So we get into town a little after 1 AM, and we swing through the nearby gas station hoping to pick up some snacks for the rest of the night. However, not much to my surprise, the gas station was closed, but we had picked up beer before we left so we could wait until the morning to get supplies and still have a good night. Well, after circling around, and we are pulling out of the gas station, I noticed that the lights of a pickup truck turn on at the back of the station. I don't really think about it. Why would I? I was honestly just excited about getting to the cabin and starting the week. From the gas station, it's about 10 miles to the cabin. All the roads are unlit and pretty rural. After about a minute or so, I noticed headlights in my mirror and I assumed it was the same truck I'd seen at the gas station. I didn't mention it to my wife because I really didn't think they were following us and I didn't want to creep her out. But the more I thought of it was really strange for the truck just to be sitting at the back of the gas station with its lights off. But after seeing the truck take the second turn behind us, I started worrying. It was almost 1:30 in the morning and we're in the middle of nowhere. Why was this truck on the road? And more importantly, why has it taken the same 3, now 4 turns as me? This went on for about 5 minutes. As I approached the first dirt road that would take us to the cabin, I thought about driving past it and making a few random turns to see if he really was following us. However, part of me still thought I was being stupid and paranoid. Plus, I really didn't want to make my wife worry that we are being followed, so I decided to take the turn. I didn't even use my signals. 10 seconds later, I saw the truck behind us. My alarm bells started going crazy. I can't stress enough how unlikely it is that somebody would have been following us this far down this particular road, especially at this time of night. Like I said before, there are only 6 cabins on the lake. There are 2 chances to turn off towards other cabins before the fork to our private road. I watched in utter dismay as the truck passed the first turnoff. "Is that your neighbour?" asked my wife. Apparently, she had been paying pretty close attention to the truck as well. "No, I don't think so. I don't know who that is," which was true. I could tell the truck was dark and was raised up. My neighbour drove an older red pickup. Weird. Do you think they're following us? I don't know. Probably not. Maybe they're lost. I could tell she was nervous by the tone in her voice, but I tried to play it cool and act like nothing was wrong. In actual reality, I was terrified. The truck had now just come off the same second turnoff as us. It was still right behind us. The causeway across to the other side of the lake was now coming up. It was after the fork that led up to our cabin. Once you hit the causeway, the only chance you have to turn around is at the cabin itself. The 2 roads that fork off are not dead ends, but they're only 1 lane, so you have to drive to the end and actually turn around in our driveway. So now, as we come up to the causeway, my heart sunk. It was spring, so all the melted snow had raised the lake water level way higher than I thought it should have been. Judging by how high the water was, it was clear that the road was probably going to be flooded. Not just a few inches. We were clearly going to have to park at the fork and hike our way through the water to the cabin and then maybe come back to the car with a canoe. I guess this would be a good time to mention that I was driving a 2000 Golf GTI. When I get to the fork, my worst fears come true. Oh, of course. In 25 years of coming to this cabin, I've never seen flooding like this. It literally looked like the road just ended and the lake began. It looked like a boost ramp for more than a road. The clearance on my car was only about 5 or 6 inches maybe. I had actually cracked the oil pan on this car by bottoming out of the rock earlier in the year in the very same road. With the truck headlights coming up behind us, I was then forced to make a decision. I could either stop and wait for the truck that had been following us into the woods in the middle of the night, carrying who knows what to catch up with us, or risk driving my car completely unequipped for off-road scenarios on a very flooded dirt road in the middle of the night. I dropped the car into second gear and drove into the water, hoping it wasn't as deep as it looked. Oh god, the water was even higher than it looked after I got into it. At first, it just come up beneath the headlights, then, when the road dipped, it come over them, killed 90% of my visibility. I looked out the passenger side window. It looked like the lake came up to the edge of the car. It was just black. Sitting, floating along through the middle of a black lake is the only way I can describe it. "Is it safe to be doing this?" my wife said, obviously scared. No, of course it wasn't. It was so incredibly stupid to be doing what I was doing. What in the hell was I thinking? We didn't have a cell signal to call for help if we got stuck, or to call for help if the guy decided to follow us. Probably not. "I can't stop now though," I said, and giving the car more gas. I then looked into my rear view mirror, and I saw that the truck was just sitting at the mouth of our road, and at the edge of the flooded water. I felt absolutely sick. Not only had it turned down my road, but it would have had a much easier time navigating the flooded road than my tiny Golf. Plus, even if I had made it, they would have followed me and I would have had nowhere to go. It was a dead end. I can't remember a time in recent memory that I felt so hopeless. I'm not a big guy, so if there's more than one person in the truck, and they wanted trouble, they could. They could have done whatever they wanted. They would have had the perfect place to do it. I then started to think about the things in the car that I could possibly use as a weapon if I needed, but I knew I didn't have anything I could access quickly. Waves upon waves of regret started washing over me. It was really hard to gauge where the road was, but having driven down them hundreds of times and judging by the trees on either sides of me, I knew that the road would start to climb up soon. Thankfully, this would mean that the water shouldn't be as deep. At least I hoped. I was right. After what felt like an eternity, I felt the car starting to climb up out of the water, uncovering the headlights. Inch by inch, the car climbed higher and higher until it was out of the water and on dry land. My heart almost burst out of joy. I then checked into my rear view mirror. I again see that the truck is just sitting at the beginning of the road. I then punched the gas and ripped around the upcoming corner. At this point, I knew the road well and it wouldn't be flooded again, but I was worried that after seeing my car make it through the water that he would try and follow us. When I got to the cabin, I shut the car off and waited for the truck headlights to come around the corner. They never came. After we got inside and locked all the doors, we joked about how weird the whole encounter was, but I still tried to play it cool. Yeah, they must have been lost and decided to turn around after seeing the conditions in the road, I said. I made a joke about how stupid I was for driving through the water, but underneath, I was still freaked out and on high alert. Whoever was in the truck knew where we were, and it wouldn't be easy for us to leave. God, all they would have to do is park at the end of the road and wait for us. I then spent the rest of the night listening for car engines and waiting for headlights to start coming down the road. After a few beers and a movie, we eventually fell asleep, but even then it was not a restful night. I laid awake for pretty much the whole night, just waiting for the sounds of an axe by the door. I actually stayed there with a knife just in case anything happened. The next morning, I drove back down the flooded road, which was pretty risky, and I parked at the fork. The truck was nowhere to be seen, and no one bothered us for the rest of the weekend. Never, ever pick up a hitchhiker by the best jeans. So this was told to me by an old family friend, Nikki, numerous times as a kid growing up. It was as one of those life advice stories just to keep in mind throughout the years. And to her credit, I have never forgotten it. Whenever anything associated with hitchhiking comes up, this always springs to mind, and probably it always will. It makes me feel a bit ill whenever I think about it, actually. So Nikki, who grew up at the same time as my dad, so this was about the early 80s I believe, was a young woman in her mid-20s. She's one of those real kind-hearted souls. She's always willing to help another out in need, you know? And I just can't imagine her being anything other than that, especially when she was younger. So at the time of this event, she was driving into the city. It was about 2 hours or so out of town, and she saw a man walking down the side of the road. As she neared him, he turned around. In typical hitchhike manner, he stuck out his old arm and expected Nikki, bless her, to pull over, and that's exactly what she did. She then asked him if he needed any help and if everything was okay. She told me that he was really polite, if not a bit shy. When he asked for a lift to the city, Nikki gave a smile and popped open the passenger door for the guy. He tossed his bag into the back seat and buckled up for the ride ahead. They pleasantly talked for most of the trip, about friends, the news, etc. You know, happy small talk. She felt that they were getting on really well and even brought dinner for him at a pit stop a little over halfway. She always seemed really flustered and awkward when she paid, but one of the things they really talked about was money and how he was pretty down on cash, which was why he was hitchhiking in the first place apparently, but he eventually relented and they went on their way. As soon as they got into the city, he thanked her profusely for the ride and food and asked to be dropped off once they hit downtown. Before getting out, he asked for Nikki's phone number so he could contact her to catch up. Excited at the prospect of being able to see her new friend again, Nikki wrote it down for him and drove off with a warm feeling of a good deed done. Now, I'm sorry if you were expecting something creepy to have happened by now, but I think this is what freaked me out so much as a kid. How nice everything seemed to have worked out. Nikki gets this crease in her forehead and a funny look in her eye when she tells me the next part. How about a week later, she got a phone call from her driving buddy. He didn't let her get a word in or even say hello, he just told her this. She should thank God that she was raised to be so polite and nice. He was going to steal that car once they got to the pit stop, murder her and do other horrendous things. He was then going to drive down and find a ditch to dump her body in and go on his merry way. But after she talked with him so kindly and treated him to dinner with a smile on her face, he just couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't think that he could live with himself after doing that to such a nice lady. And to please Nikki, never ever pick up another hitchhiker. Then he hung up the phone. Nikki never got a call from him again. When she tried redialing the number, she got to a payphone.
This story takes place in August of 2013 in the mountains of Southern Oregon. I'm a U.S. Air Force Security Forces airman, military policeman. My girlfriend was at work, and as a swelteringly hot day began to turn to thunderstorms, my buddy Nick, another military cop, and I decided to explore some back roads and get out of the heat in town. Southern Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively used, and many totally forgotten and grown over. Nick and I spent many of our days off, starting on roads that we knew, finding roads that we didn't, and driving for hours into the mountains, eventually navigating back to paved roads. On this particular day, with storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road we had never been on and began the drive into the mountains. After driving for around an hour, we hadn't seen nor heard any signs of other people in the woods. We rounded a bend in the thick fir woods and emerged in a meadow that was totally surrounded by thick aspen groves. The meadow was perfectly flat and eerily still. We both noticed the strange stillness almost immediately. No birds, hardly any insect noise, no squirrels, and certainly no other people. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a picnic table. The table was very odd, however. It was painted a bright orange and was much larger than a typical picnic table in a park. Remarking on this, Nick drove through the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange. The overall silence of the aspen grove was unsettling. Also, it was nearly impossible to see far into the trees, as aspens grow extremely close together. When we parked by the table, I hopped out of the passenger seat of the truck to check it out. I'm not very tall, only about 5'5". Regardless, the table was ridiculously oversized and practically unusable. The seats were nearly at chest level, meaning I would have to climb up to even sit on them. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed he was looking back into the aspens. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of color that was completely out of place in the thick trees. A small, one-man tent was set in the back of the trees, about 50 feet from the strange table. I had an initial feeling of dread, and felt certain that there was someone in the tent, and if we could see the tent, then they could see us. There were no campgrounds in the area, no people, no main roads for miles. Surely, someone camping so remotely would be, at the very least, a strange person. However, as we observed the tent, we didn't see any movement or hear any sounds coming from it. Nick suggested I call out. I didn't want to, but I did. "Hey, anyone in there?" I yelled. No reply. Feeling completely on edge, Nick and I thought about driving away and leaving this strange area, but we began to fear the worst. What if there was a body in the tent? What if somebody had gotten kidnapped? Foolish, I know, but we thought it all the same. After some debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around to drive away from the camp. Should we need to leave in a hurry, he would be waiting behind the wheel. With my heart pounding, I started walking through the trees toward the tent. I was totally keyed up and my senses on full alert. When I reached the campsite, several things struck me as odd. Backpacks were scattered all over. No fire had been built, no wood collected. The tent was literally full of backpacks and women's clothing. Full of dread, I turned to leave and tell Nick what I had seen. As I left, I heard Nick start yelling, "Let's go! Let's get the fuck out of here!" Not knowing why he was yelling, I ran back to the truck. When I broke out of the trees, I saw a beat-up old Ford Taurus on the road, blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leapt into the passenger seat, and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by two men. A third person was laying against the window in the back. As we drove across the meadow, the driver attempted to block us from the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerated the way we had come from. I looked back and saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. Nick drove like a madman, and though I was honestly terrified that they would catch up, we hit the highway without seeing the car again. I still do not know if the person in the back was male or female. I called the state police, and they promised to send a trooper out to check out the scene. However, I received a call the next day from a trooper, stating that the campsite, the backpacks, and the women's clothing were all gone, though we could tell people had been in the area. The strange table was still by the thick aspen grove. I have not returned to the area, and do not intend to.
He Came for Me by Blue Eyes 1101. So this is a story about my mother. It was about 21 years ago when my mum was pregnant with a beautiful child, me. That's the sort of thing I would say. She was invited to a friend's bridal shower in a really small town outside of where we lived. Mind you, we're from Kentucky, so when you travel in between small towns, you usually take the really creepy back roads. She said when she left it was about 11 PM. So she was driving in her old Nissan Sentra on a road that everybody calls Death Lane. That's because of all the accidents that occur here. For some reason, maybe because of the thrill, people like to speed around all the hairpin turns like idiots. So anyway, my mum was about halfway home when this truck kept riding really close behind her. She slowed down and pulled into the shoulder to let him pass on the one-lane road. He then slowed right down with her. He went so slow that he actually had time to stare at her. He then driven by. My mum just shrugged it off and kept on driving. About a mile down the road, she came upon the man, this time with his truck parked horizontally in the road. My mother stopped a ways back, wondering what was up. Then she saw the man getting out of the truck and in his hand was a large knife. My mum had nowhere to go with only ditches to the sides and no way to turn around. She decided to take the ditch and, of course, she got stuck. My mum was then panicking to get out of the truck and suddenly another truck arrives, forcing her assailant to move and leave. The other truck had a husband and wife in it and they ran to my mother's aid. Unbeknownst to them at the time, they had just saved my mother's life. When she arrived home, she went straight to bed, shaken by the night's events. The next day, she woke up and went to watch the morning news. She gasped by what she saw. A pregnant woman was murdered last night. Her baby was cut out and taken from her. They caught the guy. He was parked, holding the murdered child in his arms, rocking it. It was the same guy who come for my mum. Don't Ask for Directions by Lola Winford. So back when I was 14, I went on a 2-day hike in the countryside with 4 other girls. Although it was organised by our school, we weren't accompanied by our teachers during the day, so it was basically just us and a map. Not particularly surprisingly, on the first day we got very lost and were basically just wandering around aimlessly up a small country road when suddenly a guy on a motorbike approached us. We flagged him down, explained that we had no idea where we were and asked him if he could point us in the right direction. He seemed friendly and told us that we weren't at all that far off from where we were trying to get to. In fact, he said, if we walked up the road for a short distance, we should come across a farm and from there, it should be pretty obvious what direction we had to go. He then left and without really thinking, we followed his instructions. Surely enough, a short walk up the road we found said farm. But unlike what he suggested, it didn't make things any clearer as to where we were, as essentially, this was in the middle of nowhere. Also, the farm was kinda creepy. It appeared to be abandoned. At least there was no one, no animals, and no modern farm machinery in sight. It basically appeared to be a collection of very run-down barns. Just being there put us all on edge, but we didn't want to be silly and turn back just because the place was a bit creepy, so we carried on walking. We could now see that some of them had old military vehicles in them. They all had smiley faces drawn on them. This added to the general weirdness of the place. Already, some of the girls were saying that we should just turn back and that our leader was keen to press on. Again, pointing out that it would be silly to go back just because we were feeling a bit on edge. We walked past all the barns and the path ended and we were just facing open fields. An old car with one door open and a caravan were parked nearby. Again, weird, we thought. We were standing talking about what to do, when suddenly, a dog started barking really loudly and wildly in the caravan. It was such a shock, and given that we were all so on edge anyway, we all legged it back out of the farm and collapsed in a kind of wooded area behind the road. Only thing now was that we were laughing hysterically that somehow we had been so scared of a dog barking. Then suddenly, a truck drove up on the road and parked just inside of the farm area. We all fell silent. We watched as a load of maybe 6 or 7 men jumped out looking around, including the one guy on the motorbike who had given us directions in the first place. Thankfully, they had all went and looked inside the farm. It was in the opposite direction to us. This given us an opportunity to move as fast as we could while still being quiet, to then go and make some desperate phone calls to our teachers, who eventually met up with us and found us. Who knows what the guy actually wanted to do with us on that motorbike? It's scary how quickly he come back for us with 6 or 7 other guys. I'm just thankful to this day that nothing ever come of it. They could have done anything to us in those barns. When not pulled over for the police by warm fuzzy puppies. This happened to my aunt and uncle in the early 80s or so. They were living in Austin, Texas. They had attended a party in the neighbouring area. They were driving back very late, and at one point, they were driving along a very long, completely deserted stretch of road. It was bordered by woods and brush on one side. There were no houses, no street lights, and no other cars on the road. There was nothing. That was until my uncle, who's driving, notices that there's a car coming up behind them, which then speeds up and gets very close. My aunt and uncle start talking about how weird this guy is. They can see it's just one man driving, and since there's no reason to tailgate on an empty road in the middle of the night, they get really scared. Then the guy speeds up even more and pulls up alongside them. He's in the other lane. He starts yelling at them to pull over and is flashing what looks to be a police badge. My uncle then begins to slow down and starts pulling over. My auntie absolutely freaks out at this and tells him not to. She's really creeped out by the fact that there's this guy who's driving in a car that has no police markings and no flashing lights, has pulled up to them out of nowhere and is now trying to get them to pull over just by flashing a badge. While they argue with one another about whether to pull over or not, the man in the other car is getting more and more angry. He's yelling at them to pull over, beeping his horn and flashing the badge. He's still saying that he's the police. My aunt eventually starts crying and my uncle says fine. If this guy's really a cop and they need to stop for him, they will stop when they reach the next populated or busy area. Which, to be honest, would be in a while because where they were. But they reason that if he's really a cop, he would have to understand their point of view. My aunt and uncle keep worrying between themselves about whether this guy is actually a cop or not. They started to think maybe he's out of his mind, and worried that if it is a real cop, they're actually going to be in big trouble for not pulling over when they're meant to. All these thoughts were going through their head. They then finally see a gas station up ahead and plan to stop there. As soon as they pull into the station, however, the cop speeds off, never to be seen by them again. They didn't think to try and get his license plate or the time that this happened because they were so thoroughly freaked out. They'd just driven home and forgot about it. But oh no, the story doesn't end there. It gets much, much worse. A few months later, on the exact same stretch of road, a man is rescued who tells a horrifying story which made big news in Austin. There was a fake cop who saw a man driving with his girlfriend on that very same road who managed to get them to pull over. Once pulled over, the fake cop forced the man and his girlfriend to get out of the car. Maybe by gunpoint, I don't remember exactly. He then gets them to go into the woods and to the side of the road. He ties a man and his girlfriend to separate trees facing each other. He then does horrible things to both, ultimately killing the woman, while the other is forced to watch just a few feet away. I'm not even sure how the man ended up eventually getting rescued, but it was long after the fake cop was gone. Either somebody must have found the man tied to the tree, or he finally got loose to go and get help. That could have been my aunt and uncle. If they had pulled over that night, that certainly would have been the same fate that they would have met.
I just heard about this subreddit today, and I have a story that I think fits really well here. Years ago, I was home from university and was spending the evening with my girlfriend. We were feeling a little frisky, but since we were home from college at our parents' houses, we decided to go for a little drive. Our hometown was fairly rural, so it didn't take much time for us to drive out somewhere on a country road near an alfalfa field where we could have some privacy. Hardly anyone drove past here, maybe one truck every hour or so. So the engine is off, the lights are off, and our seats are reclined. My car was small, so there wasn't any room to get in the back and really go at it, but tenderness is tenderness, whether there's a stick shift between you or not. But that night, I'm glad I had to stay in the driver's seat. Just as things begin to get real heated, I see some headlights in the rearview mirror coming up the road. That's not a big deal, so I toned down the action a bit waiting for it to pass, but as the truck got closer, its headlights suddenly went dark. My girlfriend wasn't totally aware of it yet, but I pulled away a bit out of curiosity. Then I heard the coasting, gravelly crunch of a vehicle pulling off onto the gravel behind us. It was dark there, no streetlights or anything to go by, but with the moon there was. I could barely make out the outline of a truck behind us. No cab lights, no running engine. I asked my girlfriend if her door was locked. This stopped her dead in her tracks. She said it was and asked why. I told her there was someone behind us, parked in the gravel. She immediately straightened herself up, and I put my seat back up, never taking my eyes off the mirror. Then I saw the driver's side door to the truck open. The cab light still didn't turn on, and I never saw anyone get out, but that was my sign to get out of there. I told my girlfriend we needed to leave now, which she real quietly replied okay to. I started up the vehicle, and trying my best not to spin out in the gravel, drove as fast as I could onto the road. We drove in silence for about 2 minutes, heading back towards town, when I noticed that I could not see the sky clearly behind the vehicle. We were being followed. The truck still did not turn on its headlights, but it was tailgating me very closely. I calmly informed my girlfriend that they were behind us, but that we had plenty of gas, and we'd get back to town just fine, no big deal. She said okay, in that little voice again, and went silent, glancing back every so often. This continued for about 2 minutes, and I briefly considered calling the police, before the headlights behind me flared on. The truck revved its engine, pulled into the other lane. We were still on a 2-lane asphalt country road, and hauled past me like a bat out of hell. I felt like I should take her home at this point, but the last thing I wanted was for those assholes to follow us to where she lived. Whoever they were, they made me uneasy. I told her as much, and she agreed. We wove a flighty path through several nice neighborhoods, before pulling into a cul-de-sac where we could sit and wait to see if the truck was still around. We never saw the truck again that night, but our cul-de-sac time did give us the opportunity to have the intimate time we had been wanting, all the more intense due to constantly watching to make sure we were safe. Looking back, I'm sure it were some country farm people who are used to catching kids making out near their fields. They probably wanted to bang on our windows and give us a good scare for fun. But I have to wonder why they followed us for so long, and why they passed us the way they did. Were they out for a joyride, looking for some entertainment? Creepy farm truck person or people? Let's not meet. You give me the heebie-jeebies.
Dark Country Roads by Freaky Darling 85. This happened about 10 years ago when I was 19. This happened right before the party incident I posted about before. At this point, I had been working second shift at the front desk of the local sheriff's department with my shift ending at 10 at night. This night was the beginning of the weekend and I was picking up my friend from her aunt's house to stay at my house. My aunt's friend lived in a trailer park about 5 miles from outside of town. This meant you had to take a bunch of twisty country roads to get there. So I'm still on the main route talking on my cell phone with my boyfriend, who's now my husband. I know this is bad, but there weren't any other cars on the road at the time and I'm a careful driver. Things got eventful as I approached the 4-way stop at the turnoff. There was a truck in the oncoming lane signalling to turn the opposite way I was, but as I turned, the truck changes course and starts following me. Now I'm talking literally with its full beams on, and it had its bumper right up next to me. It was as close as it could possibly be. It was lighting up the inside of my car. I'm not freaking out yet because drunk idiots behind the wheel is a pretty common occurrence from where I'm from. My biggest fear at the moment was that I was going to be hit by the car. Then the truck speeds around me and starts to slow down. He's trying to pull me over. I actually finally got a good look at the truck and relayed everything to my boyfriend over the phone. The only thing that I couldn't tell him was the license plate of the truck because it was caked in mud. So this goes on for a little bit now afterward. The truck pulls in front of me, slows down to stop. I go back around him. Finally, I decide just to take the initiative and stop. I figure I'll keep my car running and only crack my window. It's on the country road in between fields. It'd be virtually impossible to really block a car on in the road, unless you're terrified of driving in grass, so I stop and crack my window about 2 inches down and I remain on my phone. The truck then pulls up beside me and opens his passenger side window and just leans across his seat to stare at me. Is there a problem? He doesn't answer me. Can I help you? Finally, he snapped out of wherever he was. I thought you were someone else. Well, that makes sense to me. I drove a really common car for the area. I knew of at least 4 other people that were in the exact same colour as mine. I breathed a huge sigh of relief and said, okay, have a good night. I started driving again, but the guy pulls right back onto my bumper and is literally riding right up behind me. I now realise that he's trying to bump my car. Now I'm panicking. I start giving my boyfriend instructions. I'm telling him where I am exactly, and I tell him to call my local dispatch and tell them to start looking for the truck. I'm convinced I'm about to be abducted, but my boyfriend refuses to hang up. Finally, I drive up on the trailer park. I don't even brake or signal, in fact. I took that turn at 50 miles per hour. To this day, I don't know how I held the road, but I did. And this truck is still up behind me. I immediately lay on the horn, thinking that if this guy is going to do something to me, someone's going to know about it. I then blared the horn all the way into my friend's aunt's driveway, and the guy is still following me. My friend and her aunt are both out on the front porch. I notice the pure horror on their faces as they see the guy in the truck behind me. He then jumps out of his truck and comes right up to the glass screaming, I thought you were somebody else, over and over again. He then jumps back into his truck and peels out. It took forever to calm my boyfriend down and then calm myself down, but eventually, everybody relaxed. My friend and I got on with our night and the next morning went to file a police report. Unfortunately, without the license plate, there wasn't much they could do. I have never seen that truck again. I'm just thankful that I didn't end up as a body on the roadside. That's a big plus. Encounter on North Dakotan Gravel Road by Dial Galink 30. This happened one day back when I was 17. I was living on my family's ranch near McLeod, North Dakota. My job, when I wasn't tending to do the various chores and tribal tasks on my family's ranch, was to go and transport the grain of farmers around from the areas during the harvest season. It was good pay considering all I had to do was drive from A to B. Also, what 17-year-old wouldn't want to drive a huge tractor around a beautiful part of North Dakota? Well, that's what I thought until one fateful day on October 18, 2008. Yep, I remember. It was around 8 PM and I was doing my last load. It was dark, real dark. All I could see was a gravel road with my headlights of the tractor. It was about 10 miles from point A heading for another 7 miles until point B when I suddenly saw the silhouettes of 5 human beings up ahead. They were blocking any way of passing. When my headlights finally made out that it wasn't just a hallucination, I immediately stopped the tractor. I don't want to fathom the idea of killing someone, despite how menacing they appeared to be. This was a big mistake. They just stood there, completely still. They were all wearing red cloaks and gave me an emotionless expression, as if they were mindless robots waiting for a command. Since they were blocking the road and to the sides of the road there were ditches I couldn't maneuver down, I had no way to get around them. For a good minute or two, nothing happened. It felt like half an hour though. Eventually, one of them spoke in a truly menacing tone. They just said, "Get out." Even though it was said almost subtly, the dead silence of the night and horrendous fear of my situation terrified me. I made those words out clearly. I was now panicking like I've never panicked before. I didn't know whether they meant leave the place or get out of the tractor. I was hoping they meant get out of the place. The middle person then lifted up his cloak to reveal a gun. I knew that they wanted me out. But instead, all of the people ran off into the fields to the sides, except for the guy armed. However, in a few moments after, he signalled toward the road in front of me and said, "Get out." Then, he proceeded to run into the fields also. I practically floored it to point B. I notified the McLeod Sheriff Office a few days later. He told me he would investigate. To this day, I am dumbfounded to why they stopped me on the road and told me to leave. Were they just lowlifes looking to prank someone, or some kind of messed up cult? I really don't know. It just brings fear to me to even think about it to this day, so I don't. Encounter on the Backroads by Han Camp. This happened about 3 years ago when I was a senior in high school. My boyfriend and I were in the car. We went to meet another couple at the movies after a basketball game just to kill some time. We were all bored and none of us wanted to go home. We went to the 10:30 showing of Dear John, which by the way I fell asleep in. I didn't care a lot for romantic movies and the only good part had to be the canon tantrum. Anyways, the movie ended and we all piled into our cars. I had to take my boyfriend home because he didn't have his license yet. I hated the back roads, but they were much quicker than going through the town and most likely being stopped at every single red light. He lived out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. So we were about 5 minutes away from his house when my headlights reveal a young woman standing in the road frantically waving her arms about, flagging me down. It's about midnight at this point and I'm wondering if maybe she possibly had her car breakdown. I felt nothing wrong with the situation, so I simply pulled over to the side of the road. I might want to mention in advance that I'm so stupid for doing this. She rushes up to the car and asks if we can give her a lift. She tells us that her boyfriend and her got into a fight and he forced her out of his car and she's walking home. She still had about 10 miles left. I felt real bad for her, but I was suspicious. I told her that she could use my cell phone if she needed to get to him, and I then made up an excuse that I simply wouldn't have enough gas for us to be able to take her. I really didn't trust her. She said that she would give me money, and then out of nowhere, she looked at me and started smiling. She kept repeating things like, "Oh my god, I know you. I remember. Don't you remember me? I know you." Now, I've never seen this woman in my whole life. She kept saying things like, "How could you refuse a ride to somebody you know? I'm not a stranger." Now, I'd only cracked my window about 3 inches at this point, and when I kept refusing her a ride, she got angry and cursed at me, calling me all kinds of names. She then reaches in the car and tried to hit me. I rolled up the window and caught her fingers in between the frame and the glass. She screamed. I unrolled it, just enough so she could get her fingers out, and quickly locked the door after she tried that. Then suddenly, out of literally nowhere, a man comes from out of the wooded area next to the road. This guy was huge. He looked like a security guard that you would see with Beyonce or somebody like that protecting her from a paparazzi. I was froze. My boyfriend slowly took his cell phone out of his pocket and dialed 911. He hit my hood and demanded I got out of the car or he was going to pull out a gun on me. I snapped back into reality and put my car into reverse. I swerved around the man and the woman as tears were pouring out of my eyes. The adrenaline had finally got the best of me, and I realised that we'd just gotten out of something that could have had a really awful ending for us. When we reached my boyfriend's house and waited for the police, they took our information and we told them what happened. They made their way back to the spot around and found that there were some burlap sacks, a gun, a knife, a rope and camera. They also found tyre marks where a car had been parked around in the wooded area. What did they want with us? I will most likely never find out.
Now, I don't know if this will sound scary through writing, but it definitely was if you were there. So, a few years back, I was cruising around with my brother, cousin, and a few friends. We decided to go down this creepy back road. We got to the end of it, and there was a trail that continued off of it. We decided to get out and walk the trail, even though it was pitch black out. We didn't really have a good feeling about the place, but we pressed on anyways. Now, let me say that if anyone else had come down the road, we would have seen their headlights in the woods. So after walking for a little bit, we all went back to the cars. My friend, Alex, stopped and said, "What's that noise?" We all stopped talking and heard a hissing noise. His tires on his car had been slashed. We all panicked, because nobody else would be at this dead-end back road in the middle of nowhere this late at night. So we got in the cars and took off. Not too far down the road, his car was undrivable, and we had to squeeze him in our Jeep. We went to a gas station to get some snacks, and when we came out, the Jeep tires were slashed too. I don't know how that could have happened, so it seems like someone had followed us and slashed our tires. So, creepy forest-dwelling tire slasher? Let's not ever meet.
Rainy Night, Crazy Woman by Coconoli. The house that I live in is a few hundred meters away from a small church in a suburb. Although I was brought up as a Christian, I was never truly religious, and I only went to said church whenever my parents took me as a kid. My dad died when I was a teenager, and we stopped going as a family altogether. After that, I only went whenever my friends asked me to tag along. Now I'm 21, and I only pass by the church whenever I had to go into the city because there's a dirt road besides it that leads into a parking lot behind, adjacent to a major road where it is easy to get a bus to work. It was closer than the village gate in the opposite direction. I only had to ride one bus from there. Now I'm not an easily scared man, nor have I previously experienced lasting trauma after being spooked. I'm here to tell you that what I saw besides that church 3 months ago still haunts me to my core. A storm was announced to hit earlier that week, but before leaving for work that early Thursday morning, the skies were clear. There wasn't even a single cloud to cover the starry sky. I didn't bring an umbrella. I climbed over the parking lot gate because it was chained shut until 6 for the first mass. The guard at the outpost didn't mind because the church staff knew my family well. I worked at a hotel as a line cook and it's very demanding. I have to leave home before the sun rises and work most days after the sun sets. The only time I get to see the sun is if I am assigned to do something stationed at a buffet. That's next to the poolside, so I get a pretty good view. So on this particular day, it was an average overworked and underkind type for me. I wasn't assigned at the buffet line. I stayed in the kitchen where there weren't any windows, so I was surprised to see the flooded streets when I clocked out. Apparently, it had been raining heavily all afternoon and it was subsided around sunset. It was around 8 in the evening when I left the hotel in my country. There were flooded streets everywhere and it meant that there was a standstill for traffic for at least a few hours. This wasn't uncommon. I had dealt with similar situations before. It also meant I could sleep on the bus, so it wasn't too upsetting. Now fast forward to around midnight and it's pouring down with rain. I'm not too far off the church parking lot, so I decided to get off the bus and start my walk. I then took out my phone and wallet and put it into my waterproof backpack. This also contained a spare shirt, my house keys and a knife set. I didn't mind getting wet though. Around this time, the parking lot gate was already chained shut, but I climbed over like I usually did. It turns out that it had flooded knee deep in the parking lot and there was no security guard at the outpost. I figured that he'd probably just gone and retreated into the church. It's dark out, but I focus on the small lights from the house in the distance. I trudge my way through the open parking lot that could have passed as a kiddie pool when I hear this strange sloshing sound in the corner. Due to heavy rain, I couldn't clearly make out if it was directional and whether it was alone or not. All the lights to the lot were shut and the only things that guided me were the few lights from the houses far ahead and my memory of the landscape. It's straight across from the dirt road, so I didn't have to worry about a light source. The sudden sound of all the raindrops accumulated into a dull static noise, so it was now easy for me to hear that there was something going on in that corner. I could see the shape of a person who seemed to be sitting down. As I got a little bit closer, I was able to let my eyes adjust to the dark. I could tell that it was a woman because of her long hair and curvy outline. She was flailing her arms around and splashing the water. She was grunting as she pounded her fists into it. She was about 2 cars lengths away, so I wasn't concerned about it. I've dealt with crazy people before. I glanced over a few times as I passed her and then got to the dirt road. It was quite unnerving. She was out of my line of sight at this point and the mud made it hard to walk. The water was only ankle deep, but I kept on having to jerk my foot free after each step because my shoes tended to sink into the mud. A small splash then made me look over my shoulder, and in the darkness of the dirt road, I saw that the woman was splayed out face first into the water. I froze. I didn't know whether to help her or not. I hated the thought of being the guy who let somebody drown in 6 inches of water. She was about 10 steps away from me, and before I decided what to do, she began moving. It was too dark to distinguish any details, but her outline was undeniable enough for me to tell that she was looking up at me. She suddenly got onto her hands and feet. It was like she was about to stand, but her hands lingered onto the ground, rump in the air. I was already scared pal at this point. My legs didn't work and I thought of reaching for my knives, but I was afraid to move. And then she starts crawling towards me on her hands and feet. This sent a jolt through me all of a sudden. I'm now sprinting towards my house. I can hear the splashes behind me along with her chorus breathing. It was almost like she was coughing. My eyes began filling with tears and the rain against my face made the light in the distant houses blurry. I was literally running for my life. I couldn't tell if she was catching up with me, but it didn't look like I had a long time to look back. I wasn't even going to risk it. I heard her yell in a voice so rough it resembled a pig squeal, short, sharp and loud. A wordless shout of anger. I believe that was the fastest I've ever run in my life. At this point, I couldn't hear anything but rain. My house was so close. I sped by a few houses with their dim porch lights and I could tell that I was running on asphalt. I didn't know when it happened, but apparently I lost my shoe back at the dirt road. There was one last bend and I was at my doorstep. I forcefully tore my backpack zipper open and fumbled inside for the key, frantically looking around to see if she was still chasing me. I then got into the house, slammed the door shut and collapsed. Now I don't recall the rest of the night, but when I woke up the next morning in my bed, my older brother filled me in. He was awake when I got home that night and went to the front door when the noises alerted him. He said I was on my knees, leaning against the door quietly sobbing to myself. He woke my mum and they were trying to console me, but I wouldn't talk. They tried to question me, but I would shake my head. They then got me some dry clothes and led me to bed. Over breakfast, I explained what happened and my mum said she'd notify the village guards. I couldn't tell if they were concerned for my safety or not because I didn't think that they understood the fear I felt. My brother even joked about it. I didn't go to work the following day. In fact, I took the rest of the week off because I caught a fever. The guards then did a minor investigation and even increased the patrol for the while, but they didn't find anything with my shoes. When I did get better, I started walking along the main village road to get to work. When I go home, I now use a carpool buddy who can get me close enough to home that I don't ever have to use that dirt road again. If he can't drive, I get a taxi. I can't walk alone anymore without glancing over my shoulder every 5 seconds. Sudden loud noises make my heart jump. I can't stand the sound of rain. I've been getting better now though. I can sleep with the lights off. I just wish I would stop seeing that crawling woman in my dreams. I wish I could tell you more about her, but I honestly can't. It's one thing to be afraid of something, but it's one thing to feel the true feeling of fear. I have no idea what this was to this day, and to be honest, I don't even want to think about it. The road trip. A true account of a creepy situation during a family vacation by Wandering 33. When I was younger, each summer and almost every New Year, my family would pack the car and go on a road trip to visit family in Mexico. We never had any problems until one particular trip when I was 8. Like every road trip before, we left our home in North Texas around 6 PM in order to reach our destination the next morning. So around 2 AM, we crossed into Mexico, and that's when things started getting weird. When you're the only people on a stretch of freeway in the middle of the desert, you don't tend to freak out about having the same car behind you for miles. It was practically pitch black outside our car windows, the only visible shapes being the dotted stars and the eerie silhouettes of the cacti. We'd been in Mexico for about an hour, and we still had a few more hours to drive. I remembered feeling sleepy but being semi-conscious of what was going on around me, because I still didn't have the skill to fall asleep really in a car. So when my mother suddenly spoke my dad's name, I heard her say this: "Miguel, that car behind us, it's been with us since we left Ledo." My dad peeked at the car and shrugged his shoulders off at my mother's tension. A lot of cars use this road. He's probably going to Ranson or another city, and he left it at that. Despite his sureness, my mum kept a very wary eye on the car behind us. By this time, my siblings and I were hyper aware of the car and entertained ourselves by watching it through the gaps in the luggage that blocked the rear view. However, being young, we got tired pretty quick. He's getting closer, my mother noted, and we turned to watch as the car inched closer and closer to ours. He's too close, Mingwa. And she was right. By this time, the car was practically pressed against the rear of our car, and on a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere with another few hours until daylight, it was downright scary. We couldn't do much either. My dad didn't slow down, didn't stop. He didn't speed away either. He just drove. The car followed. The next 30 minutes were the most tense that we'd ever experienced. The car would ease off sometimes, only to press its blinding headlights against our rear once more. Like he knew exactly what he was doing, freaking us out, but was enjoying it. It was during one of those periods that the car had pulled away that my mum spotted a police car ahead parked on the side of the road, and she didn't miss a beat. "Pull over, right in front of the car now, pull over, Miguel." And he did. The car kept on driving. Now I wonder how confused the policeman must have been as he watched my dad park our car right in front of him. The policeman came over and asked what was wrong with my mother, and she urgently explained everything to him. The way that the car followed us home, the way it taunted us. The policeman took her claim seriously and then told us of how people victimized. They had their cars stolen on these empty highways by thugs and criminals. He then offered to drive behind us for the whole way back to make us feel safe. We drove off with the police cruiser behind us, relieved. It was until about 10 minutes later that we saw something that confirmed the policeman's words and my mother's fears. 10 minutes later, we saw the car pulled over to the side of the road, waiting. Never Pee Alone on a Lonely Gravel Road by Ernest Me. So I was driving back to my college from my family's house after Thanksgiving break. I was travelling through a rural area in the Midwest and I suddenly had the urge to pee, badly. I was reading all the road signs I come across to see if there was a nearby town that I would be able to stop in and find a gas station or something. Unfortunately, the nearest town was 30-ish miles away, and I had to pee so badly, it was unbearable. I finally made the decision to get off at the next exit that I found. Even though they don't lead to any towns, I shortly after decided to pull off onto the next exit. I then come across a gravel road. I thought this was perfect because I didn't want to get in trouble for exposing myself in front of anybody. It was a very private road. Just so that all of you know, I'm a female, by the way. It's very difficult for females to pee on the side of the road. I thought the best course of action would be to take my empty McDonald's cup and pee into that. And I did just that, inside of my car, just in case anybody drove down that lonely road. So I had then finished my business and I dumped the cup. I not only littered, but I also dumped the contents. So I put this onto the grass in the side of the road. I was starting my car and getting ready to turn my car back around the way I come when I suddenly saw a bright red car speeding down the road that I was on. It startled me, but they driven right past. I thought to myself, must be the locals messing round. I then started to drive off and I saw a dinghy, rusty red pickup truck coming down the road after the car. They too, driven straight past me. As they passed though, I saw two male passengers who were staring straight at me. This freaked me out, but I told myself it was all the more reason to get a move on. I still kept my eye on the pickup truck though, and I saw them turning around coming straight at me. This freaked me out so much I decided the best course of action to do would be to drive in their direction. I was continuing down the gravel road as opposed to turning around, giving them an opportunity to chase me. I drove right by them again, and this time I saw that they were grinning at me. I was so scared I hit the gas, which on a gravel road doesn't do much good to be honest. I finally got a grip on the road and headed along the gravel road. I looked in my rearview mirror and I saw that they were following me once again. I was freaked out. My hands were shaking. My foot was flooring the accelerator. I reached for my phone. Now, I'm not the person just to call 911 in any situation. In fact, I was too scared to call 911 because I was afraid I was just being paranoid. But as I looked in my rearview mirror, they were again gaining on me. I decided to call the police. When I called the police, the operator picked up and I explained to her what was happening. During this phone call, the men in the pickup truck were so close that I could see their front tires. I was sliding all across the gravel road, trying desperately to stay on the phone with the operator. She was giving me directions to the nearest town several miles away. They followed me the entire way there, all the way until I reached the police station. In fact, I saw them turn around very quickly though, because they knew I was now out of their reach, or probably because they saw the police station. I definitely learned my lessons from this, and now I think I'll just stick to peeing in public restrooms, not in McDonald's cups. Thanks for watching. The guest narrator on this video is GoodniteGoosebumps. Make sure you go and check his channel out and subscribe to his content. He has a very good narrating voice and I'm very thankful that he narrated these stories so well for me. So thank you GoodniteGoosebumps. I really hope everyone is enjoying the new direction I'm taking the channel into. I'm going to keep this up and keep it going, so it should be really exciting for you guys. I'm also currently unwell and in the process of losing my voice. Doing these narrations probably didn't help it much, but if there's any deviation in my voice in these narrations, that's what caused it. That's the other reason I've not been able to upload quite as much as I've wanted to at the moment. But I'm getting better and I'm getting there. Again, if you have any narrators you'd like to see me work with, then please leave them in the comments below. I am getting through them and I'm actually really liking the suggestions that you guys are coming up with, so just keep that up. Thanks for watching again. I hope you all have a nice day. I'll talk to you all soon.